Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with book coaches and editors who are also besties. We discuss books not as readers, but as writers to draw inspiration from great books and lots of laughs. And this month, this is Rachel's pick. So that means, y'all, she's dragging me through it. Not just like I've been all extra. But this month, we are reading Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik.
Nailed it.
And
flawless.
Listen, y'all, every episode I'm going to get a little bit better, okay? And this has been already such a colorful and eventful discussion. And today we are going to be talking about characters. We are going to warn you in advance that we said a lot about characters last week just because you could not help it, but we do have more. We have more. But before we get into talking about Spinning Silver, Rachel, what do you have going on over there at Story Cypher?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I feel like my small talk is low-key kind of boring this week. Because honestly, when this episode comes out, I'm gonna be on vacation, sort of. I think vacation is too, because I'll be working the whole time. So I think vacation is not quite the right word, but I'm heading back to my old stomping grounds in central Kentucky. One of our best friends is graduating with his Ph.D. from Oxford, and then moving back to the States. And so he and his wife and their dog, which I'm very excited about, are going to be stopping off in the Lexington area to visit family. And so we're all staying in an Airbnb together. So one of our best friends from Pennsylvania is coming down, and then he and his wife are going to be there. We're all going to stay in this Airbnb for about a week together and get to hang out and have a reunion. And that, honestly, like I said, when this episode comes out, that's what I'm doing this week. So I've still got, because I've got I've got clients querying. I've got diagnostics coming in, or prepping for final haul for pub. And so all of that stuff is still going on, and I'm just going to be doing it at an Airbnb in Lexington. So that's why I'm it's yes vacation, no vacation. But we haven't seen them for a year and a half or 2 years. Because obviously, they have been living in England, so it's not that easy to catch each other. But yeah, that's what we're doing this week. And I'm just really excited because I don't spend a lot of time outside of my office. I'm in my office a lot. Mm-hmm. Not even just my house, specifically the office. And getting out is really good for my brain and for and it's good for the creative muscles, get change, a change of scenery sometimes, just kind of, it shakes up your brain so that it kind of you can kind of make fresh connections. And so I'm looking forward to it. So y'all, that's where I'm going to be. I'm going to be in Lexington, hanging out with my friends, making dinner, eating cake. It's going to be great. Those are my plans. That's literally my small talk.
Listen, I'm here for it. Because we record out of order, it's always crazy for me to even think about when this is going to actually happen. It's enough to wrap my brain around that it's happening right now. Okay. But I think it's going to be so much fun. I still want to go back to Kentucky. I want to do that. I think we're going to go. We got to go. I still want to go back.
Tell me when, because I love, Lexington's an awesome city. And of course, we've got bourbon tours for freaking days, which I know is what you're that's after. What I want. Yes. For research, everybody, by the way, Dana's not a heavy bourbon drinker, but she's a researcher.
I've never even had bourbon, ever.
Oh, you've never had bourbon before?
No.
Oh, girl, you're gonna get your fill in Lexington. We're gonna need a driver to cart our butts around.
Oh, you already know.
Also, because I'm a certified lightweight, right? I don't drink that often as it is. So we're we're gonna go one tour, and by the end we're gonna be okay.
Trevor's gonna be never. Y'all two just don't need to do this. How about you never? But no, I'm excited that you get to do it. And listen, this is where we are the total opposite. I don't think I need to actually leave to get new connections. I'm good with my existing connections. I'm just not a people person. I literally, this past weekend, we went to a family gathering, had a great time, but it just gets my brain all worked up because I just am like, okay, we got to get dressed, like for real to get dressed. I had to wear a dress. I had to get ready. So it's like, okay, but we had a great time. So I think you'll have a great time too.
Thank you. Thank you. What about
And
you?
how long are you guys going to, like, for the weekend? Like a long weekend?
We'll be there for a whole week.
That'll be
so
nice.
The nice thing too is like, right, we're not doing anything except being at the Airbnb together. So like, except for like going to like a graduation party, like sweatpants, like, it's nothing, it's not too, it's one of those things where it's, when you're with people that you can like it doesn't feel like peopling, it's one of those which keeps it from feeling like, because I can do a weekend conference and then I'm like, that's pretty cool, that's pretty fun, but I'll be tapped out by the end. This is way more low-key than that because it's not strangers, it's just old friends.
Oh, that's gonna be so nice. I'm excited for you and getting out. So let's see here. Honestly, by the time we are into this going live, like we're going to be into the second quarter.
Yeah.
I still can't believe, like, as we're doing this now, that we're at the end of the first quarter.
Oh,
like,
man,
I feel like time is going so fast. And so that has been just an interesting thing. One of the things that we've been doing at Danja Tales has been like revamping our existing content of like getting our summaries, making sure like all of the handouts and everything is sort of on par. And we've started our first round of like high level. What I did is sort of like put things in cycles, and so now I'm able to teach the cycle. Like, if you are here are all the workshops that can support you doing
great.
that, and here's what moves you from this cycle to the next cycle, and having an in-house sort of scale of where you are as an author, whether you have your brand defined or not. Do you have your lead magnet? Have you did your first series? Do you have a flagship series? Like, almost like so that there's a diagnostic level into how they move through what we're doing, so they know where to find the resources.
So good.
And it is good, but it has been such an interest. First of all, going back and watching myself from like 3 or 4 years ago, I was just like,
who's that girl?
Listen, I have to subject people to watching. Listen, the teaching is still sound, but I'm just like, oh my gosh, and just try not to focus on the video, but finding that everything just builds and flows and sort of has a rhythm, it that made me feel good. But just getting that all together, and it's been nice as we're seeing new people come through, and it helps them to get their footing quicker.
Yeah.
And so because originally we wasn't planning to like be around this long.
Yeah.
So the thing that
it always amazes me. You start something, you're like, I don't know, maybe we'll try it for the year, and then it's like 5 years later and you're like still doing it and growing, and like
it's like, what happened? And I can look back and clearly see what happened, but it also is a testament to just doing it and not being super attached to what's next, because you really don't know. You don't know until you do it. Because I would think that I'm not the community person. Like, I don't have the energetic bandwidth for it, but I've made it work, and everyone just sort of like, it's really cool how everyone sort of vibes and sort of gets it and gets when I'm not in that vibe. But so we're doing that, and it's been really helpful, and it'll be interesting to see, like, as people gravitate towards a sort of establishing what level you are in and where you are within that level, and having resources to be able to grab and just sort of pick up and go, so that when they're coming into calls and situations that they can use it. And so that's been great. And then also it's been a great transition to see the way people are adopting it into their process. So it's becoming not just how we operate, but how they operate. And so watching people thrive through that. And so, yeah. So it's just been lots of that, lots of reading through people doing like getting alpha reads and stuff like that. And I think I'll tell you guys about it later, like about that. But yeah, that's what we're doing. It's not, I feel like it's not a lot, but it is, because when you're talking about looking through, 4 or 5 or 6 workshops of content, it's like, oh, wow, there's a lot here.
Yeah.
And you just don't realize it.
Yeah, it's cool to see, right, what builds over time and how that sort of like also turns into like you said, like sort of your way of doing things. And I think that's the thing that's so cool about teaching the writing process is like you introduce people to a way of doing it so that they have a path to follow, so that it's not just sort of like a blind, like, where do I go? What am I doing? Like, and you're just winging it in all directions. And then watching people get to integrate it in their way, right? Where it becomes like their, and it's still, you can usually kind of like still recognize like, oh yeah, this is kind of the process that we all go through together, but it takes on their individual flavor as they find out how they work and how their process sort of functions. But it gives some of that structure to the process to be able to find like your sort of like unique flavor of that process. And that's like something that develops, right, as you continue writing books, as you get a feel for your way of doing things, but without having to kind of like flounder and to have that sense of like, okay, I know at this stage I tend to like to do this thing, and I will, sort of, I like to move in this way. And this is how much I want to know before I do a first draft. This is how much I have to freaking figure out in the draft, and just come what may, and like all of that, but finding your pocket inside of like a sort of repeatable process.
It sure is.
It's so good.
And it's amazing to see how you can have that same starting block for everyone, and then how it morphs and changes, not just from a sense of their personal aspect, but then when they're sort of infusing their genre, right? Because especially when people think about romance and you think romance, okay, it's just romance. There's millions of genres in romance. There are a lot in romance, and it can literally change because of that. I have this one client, she uses the same process that people use in romance to write Christian devotionals. And I'm just like in my mind, it makes total sense. Because if you ask me, every story is a love story. Every story is a romance. I'm going to find a way to find the love in it. Because everybody want to be loved. But to see her doing, she's like, it works, Dana, it works. Like, okay.
That's awesome.
So, exactly. And so, but it, and even too, in the last part of that has been like this really cool, like, I think it's a cool aha of like, I really don't feel like I teach writing. I don't feel like I really am comfortable with that, like that thought per se. Like, I feel like more than that, like, it's like, how do you think about your writing? Like, how do you see and think about story? And then once we figure that out, then it makes it easier for us to figure out what you need to write this story. Because a lot of times when you're trying to adopt the mechanics of somebody else and it's not how you think, you're going to always stumble, because there's nothing natural about it. You're already asking yourself to do this different thing. And for many people, it's what they've always wanted to do. But just because you wanted to do it doesn't mean you know how to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
And so wrapping your brain around like, this is how I see story. This is how I see. And then it helps me to begin to interpret and to say it in a way that aligns with how they already see it, so that we can get them there a little bit faster. And so, that's been interesting to see, because I'm just like, okay, yes, they're there, but they're there as building blocks. Like, you can't get there without this. But once we get over that, my real jam, it's like putting flavor on that thing. So, yes. So with that said, y'all, we are about to dive into our discussion this week of Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. And Rachel is going to hit us with the summary.
All right. In this Rumpelstiltskin-inspired fairy tale, Miriam is a moneylender's daughter living in a small town near Lithfuss, where Starrick raiders and lengthening winters threaten to bring ruin to palace and peasant alike. Her soft-hearted father refuses to collect repayment, plunging the family into poverty and forcing Miriam to take over the family business. There's nothing magical about Miriam's keen eye for business, turning silver into gold, until she catches the attention of a Starrick king, and Miriam is wrapped up in a conflict of czars, demons, and Starrick. Caught between two worlds and the conflict between them, Miriam must fight to protect her family, her people, and choose whether she's going to be a pawn or a queen.
Alrighty. Well, part of this, I did give you all just a heads up that some of this we kind of talked a little bit about last week because it was almost impractical to not. But I'd love to know, Rachel, what are some of the things that you want us to discuss when it comes to characters in this story?
Yeah, so I've got three basic things. The first one obviously is going to be her use of multiple POV to weave together multiple stories into a cohesive whole. I'll aim not to repeat too much because we talked extensively about this last week, but I think there's so much to unpack here. So, but also this is sort of like, it's connected to the first point, but it is sort of its own thing. That what's interesting is we have multiple stories getting weaved together, loads of POVs, but it's still very clear that Miriam is our protagonist. And I think talking about just sort of how she pulls that off and what that looks like is worth discussing, how you sort of keep that protagonist center stage when you're working with so many points of view. And then lastly, I really want to talk about how she really utilizes every single point of view to help us sympathize with the character whose point of view we're in. Like, even characters that we were sort of like, ugh, when we get into their head, the feeling of like, right, it actually sort of moves us toward them, even though we sort of like our first impression of them is very poor. And so she really, I think there's a couple of things that she does that helps her to do this, but I think that she does it better than I've seen in a lot of books. Again, especially when you're just dealing with this many points of view, to make each character feel so deep and so sympathetic. That's not really easy to pull on our sympathy for that many characters, but I think she does it and she does it well. And I think it's worth sort of exploring. So those are my three big ones. What do you got on your list there, Dana?
I sort of mentioned my first one last week, but it's here this week too. Okay. Which is the three different forms of magic. Okay. Can I just please start with my caveat that y'all know I do fantasy, but it's not my number one jam. So I'm always being exposed to different types of fantasy whenever we have these sort of picks. I always feel like the pockets that I'm in are because my clients are there. And so I read it because I'm reading it with them, but that's just not something I gravitate towards naturally. But I found that there were some aspects of this that were really in my wheelhouse as far as like how I see characters and character growth because of the way she did this story. So the first thing that I have is what I mentioned last week, which is the three different forms of magic. Yeah, I gave the caveat because this could be like me making it up because it's just how I see story or not. So just take that with a grain of salt. So what I have is the like each one of those main point of views, because we have a lot of them, is sort of exploring magic in a different way, even though they are all exposed to the same type of actual like enchantment style of magic. So I have that there is magic in the ordinary that we see through Wanda and her experiences. Yeah. We have a magic through knowledge and perception that we see through Arena. And I love just how she sort of like thinks her way through. And we do see magic sort of in the end. And then we see actual supernatural magic, like the enchantment magic through Miriam. And you see that over time, it transforms. Like in the beginning, the way she sort of appears in the first act becomes sort of this embedded sort of rhythm for her, and it sort of progresses. And I think that's really going to go well with your hand in hand with the keeping her clearly as the protagonist. So we have those three forms of magic that ends up being like ordinary survival, strategic intelligence, and then the actual supernatural power. Another thing that I have is sort of Miriam's agency comes from love. And again, y'all know I'm a romance girly. So I feel like everything's about love. And so I think one of the like hidden superpowers of Miriam is the fact that she really is sort of this mirror of both her parents' love as well as even her grandfather. And they instill something in her that sort of creeps into every single thing that she does throughout this process. The way she treats people, in her sense of being even fair, even when she sort of believes that people are not being fair with her because of her being a woman and being a Jew. But you see that permeate all the way through her ascent through the story. And I mean ascent, but we don't give away spoilers. And so we see that her strength comes not just from the fact that she is super smart and she is very astute and financially sound. And even in some of the oddest moments, she draws on that to give explanations. And I'm like, girl, that might be going over their heads, but it's okay. We are getting it. And even sometimes in her stubbornness of people not getting over on her, she still likes to be fair. And she still comes from this place of love. And ultimately, even though won't talk about it a lot, I'm sure, we see it even more in how her parents move through the rest of the story. So I really, really, really love that. And so she just becomes emotional, like she has this emotional foundation, but then it begins to show how she needs to understand how the world operates. And it's not just from this sense of fairness. Y'all, I'm saying fairness probably really loosely, but I think it tracks throughout the story that it can be applicable throughout the story. So I love that a lot of her agency comes from that. And then the final thing that I have is how the world sees them versus who they become. We have those three main POVs, and one of the things that we see repeatedly is like how they identify and how it's shaped throughout the story. You have their economic status, you have their ethnicity, you have then how that transfers to how they see themselves and how that must change in order for their worlds to change, like literally. And so I sort of have the world thinks it knows who these women are, but each of them ends up redefining their identity. And it's so amazing sort of how they ping pong and how they sort of bump into each other's worlds and how that is just another step in the trajectory that they need to go in. And I hope I'm able to say it. I don't think it's a spoiler. There's this one scene with Wanda and Miriam's mother that I feel like so represents the journey that all three of them are on. Like they feel like I almost like I don't have a stake in this fight, but it's actually like, no, you do. Yeah. You've done all of these things. You deserve to be here. And sometimes they got to think their way out of it. Sometimes they have to strategize their way out of it. And sometimes they have to fight their way out of it. But they do. And I think that's a testament to what we talked about last week when it comes to themes and sort of it just filtrating all the way through the story and how they transform as women in this story. And so the fact that she's able to do it on those three levels that feel so unique and distinct, but it is a universal story for them. It just really does a great job in this story.
Yeah.
So with that said, I think where I want to end and where you want to begin go hand in hand of talking about this multi-POV story and how it sort of gives us this depth of character.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to make a statement that I think the cast of this book is just bonkers. There are so many people in this book. It is a wild-sized cast. And so we did talk at length in last week's episode Plot, just about some of the potential pitfalls with the amount of POVs that we're working with and where those can sort of like give you a bit of a start stop and where it created some lack of clarity. So I'm probably not going to talk too much more about that. So outside of a few of those decisions that at times made the story again sort of have start stops or feel unclear at times. The overall, when we look at our three primary POVs and the way that she used each woman's story and weaved it together into one thing, I think is really, really kind of a work of art here in the way that they so had, and you kind of already started touching on this, they each so had their own journey and their own experience, and yet they all collide into something that all feeds into that central story promise that sort of opened up, or that central story problem that's opened up at the very beginning of the story. And so this is, we have a very clear movement from, and sometimes I think that she's very clever about sometimes the way that she uses like events or objects to sort of like bring us into the next POV, so that we're disoriented at first, but once we get situated in the new POV, we're like, ooh, like sneaky, okay, right? Like using the ring to kind of jump us from act 1 to act 2 and introduce our next character. And Miriam, she sort of hires out Wanda to cover her dad's debt, and then shifting into Wanda's perspective of getting hired out. And so that, so I think that the mechanic of it is quite interesting. And it makes, again, once you sort of like get oriented, the experience of it kind of interesting when you're like, oh, you pulled one over on me, didn't you? Yeah. Yeah. And one of the ways that she does this a lot, so that we don't fully stall out, is we'll be in a POV, and then when we shift POVs, she'll sort of expand upon the event that we witnessed in the previous scene from that character's perspective, but then use that as kind of like the springboard to move the story forward, so that we're kind of always like layering, which is why it can feel like we're kind of doubling back, which again is that sort of where you deflate some of that tension sometimes, where you sort of have one, y'all, if you're listening, I'm using my hands to demonstrate. So just picture it, I guess. I don't know. But like you've got one event in one POV, and then you sort of layer over so that they sort of overlap a little bit the next POV, but then it still moves forward. And then it's right. So it's sort of like this kind of number. And she does always build that narrative forward. And I think that's one of the ways that she's able to go deep into characters by using those POVs, as well as still moving that narrative forward so that it doesn't like stall. Because I think one of the pitfalls that I see sometimes with some of my writers when they're doing sort of like these overlapping POVs that overlap in an event is we'll be in one POV and we'll see the event. Then we'll go to the next POV, and it's really just a rehashing of the exact same event from that person's perspective. And that's something that I'll just say on the whole, I recommend avoiding, because it doesn't tell us anything new about the story, right? So then we're just like, oh, well, I already saw that. Like, and so using the opportunity to kind of like springboard, so we get a little bit of that flavor of the event from this character's perspective, but then move that action forward. I think on the whole, she does that really well. And it's how she manages to give us Miriam and Wanda and Irina all having their own separate journeys that are still building the same narrative forward. And it's really, it's a work of art to take those three POVs and thread them through like that while still being so much their own stories.
I think as you say that, if you guys can't see her hands, like I totally get it. Like when you normally will have this take place is for your singular protagonist, or like I know in romance you have two protagonists where all of your subplots and your main plot sort of converge, and then they sort of have one through line through the rest of the story. But what we're doing is experiencing that from three different people. Yeah. Right. Versus it being in that have almost not 100%, but almost equal standing. Right, except for the fact that Miriam is the protagonist. And it's sort of what you're saying goes into my last point. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I think it just shows, because I sort of itemize out some of the things. So what you have here is that you see the differences between the women, how they are perceived versus who they actually are. So Wanda, you sort of see that she begins with as an extension of what's going on in their family dynamic. And you see that eventually she really becomes both autonomous, but also even in how she deals with her and her siblings, and how she sort of steps into her own sense of power and agency through being we can't give away anything. I'm just gonna say the way she came up with the plan with her brother. I'm just gonna say it like that. In the beginning, and she didn't even know what she could do with the plan. All she knew is, I know this much. I've watched her. I'm seeing what's going on, and she's learning to cherry pick what she's learning from Miriam, from a situation that should have been a hardship, and she's turning it out to work in her favor. She was just like, okay, wait a minute. This is what we're going to do. We're going to put a penny here. We're going to put a penny there. And I was just like, come on. We see from Arena that she could be seen as this person that has affluence and privilege. But then when we get into her world, we realize that she's almost like everyone else. Right here, she's initially kind of like in this pawn in a political marriage. And we even see her father doing all this stuff to sort of one up, if you will, the people that are around them, and to gain her a sort of favor because she's sort of seen as being average. But then circumstances are going to turn in her favor to where she takes the situation where she could have been average and uses something that her let's say her housemate continue to say that she's always been this way, using her intellect and this quiet power and quiet force to change a kingdom. Right. Yeah. And then Miriam, we see that she's seen as cold and calculated and ruthless because she's enforcing debts. But really, in the beginning, she's just trying to do this to save her mom. She's just tired of her mom being hungry. She's tired of her mom being cold. She's tired of her mom being sick. And it's like, okay, if my dad's not about to do it, I'm about to do it. She started writing out the debts, and she's like, listen, I'm going out of town. They're like, what are you doing? I'm coming for my money.
Yeah.
Either if you don't have it today, I'll be back next week or whatever. Like it's just like taking the situation, and basically what she does, her actions then ultimately reshapes everything, because her making that decision changes everything for the story. And which is going to go into your thing about her being a protagonist. And so what you see is you would see this repeated thing of something that I believe fantasy gets to do so well, and why I do love reading them, is that you can take situations and circumstances that we see in a contemporary context, and you can really explore them without bumping into people's perceptions of it, because you are sort of shaping it in this fantastical element, but it's all the same. We see the same thing with how women are treated, whether it's based on economics, ethnicity, station. And what she's able to do in this environment is show it very clearly. And then you sort of wrap it in magic. But it's something that we experience all the time. And you can begin to say, like, okay, well, how can I take the way people see me, and instead of letting it be a negative, let it work in my favor? Because they thought she was quiet. Baby, she put on that crown and that ring.
Yeah.
And it was on and popping. It really was. And so what you see is that ultimately it becomes the choices of the characters. And another reason why I wanted to mention that now is this is where your true character development can shine. Because this isn't about what you say, it's about what they do and their choices. And when we see the choices on the page, you want your reader nodding. You want them leaning forward so they can see, okay, what is she going to do? And when you talked about the fact that it could be a hardship, what starts happening is begins to reveal their true character. And the question of, am I going to step into this? Or am I going to continue to be in a mode of reaction? Am I going to be actively making these changes? And I feel like all of them do it. there was like each one of them have such not just pivotal moments, but sort of thought provoking, rising to the surface moments of like, what are we going to do? And even to the point where, girl, there was some times when Wanda was like, I don't want to tell nobody because I don't want to mess up what I got going on. I don't need nobody to know that I'm eating. I'm warm. She's just like, but then she had to think, like, even like her dynamic with her brothers and how all of that began to change. But that's all because she started taking agency and started saying, like, I'm not about to leave my brothers in this situation. I'm not going to keep allowing myself to be in this space, or even continuing to learn not to be in a state of bitterness. And I'm using that lightly because it was a lot going on there, because it's easy to just attach that one word, but like a bitterness of like where her mother's, I'm not giving it away, but what happened with her mother, her father, her brothers, other siblings, and how that affected her, and not allowing herself to stay there, but then beginning to take on and embody the love. And even when she didn't understand it, like, why are they always smiling? Why is
so
like
good.
Girl, and there was some parts where I'm crying, but I can't stop reading because I'm just like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to be loved. And you just wanna love them back. And even though she's like, I have nothing to give you. And she's like, you've already given enough. So you just sit back, baby. You just sit back and let me do it for a change. When I said, come on, mama, love on that baby. Listen, so they don't get to go to the tree. Okay.
So good.
It was. So I say all this even after I was kind of a little tough last week, that this is one of those times where not just you see character, and this is what it means to bring it to the page, but also it's one of those things that I've been really studying, of like how people can still really love a story, even though mechanically there are some things that could have been better. This is why. Because at the heart of it, all we are trying to do is get it right. We're just trying to deal with the cards that we've been dealt. And what we see here is they've just been dealt some really tough cards, and they are not able to continue in the same mode anymore. Because they've been exposed to too much. They've been given an opportunity, and it's like, am I going to step into this, or am I going to just let this thing roll over me? And it's like, okay, I'm not. But they don't know what that means. And we are in their skin as they figure out, what does that mean? So with that said, long story short, I feel like in this world, the way that we're seeing them as these powerful beings, and we see in these 3 POVs, we're also seeing how they see themselves and how the world sees them and how they address it. And when she picked it, instead of it being, we see one protagonist dealing with all 3 of these things. I am a woman. I am a Jew. I am poor. She was money poor, but she was opportunity rich. It's just the daddy didn't know what to do with it. And she's like, listen, I always feel like I'm bringing in hip hop examples. She gonna be like Mr. Elliott. Let me flip it and reverse it. She was like living. She don't know nothing about Missy Elliott. I'm gonna tell her. She just like, I'm about to flip and reverse this. Watch me. Even when she didn't know. She was like, I'm about to stay confident. I'm gonna say it with my whole chest and see what they do. And instead of doing that in one character, she does it in 3, and that's a part of the depth too. It's a risk. Oh, from what we talked about last week, that was the risk she took. But what I'm talking about this week is how it pays off. Because her having those 3, and then and where her Naomi, her magic comes in, is how she then sort of brings it together, and she weaves it together literally, even to the point of passing through space and time and location. And that's where the magic comes in. So yeah, I'm sort of tag teaming on that one. because I feel like this is the flip side of my me being a little bit peeved last week, that I'm like, but this is the payoff, that you have
Yeah.
characters that you really see, and you see them dealing with the same thing,
Yeah.
but their character determines
Yeah.
how we see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and seeing those situations, right, from those different angles. And this actually gets really great at the sense of creating sympathy for every point of view, right? Because the thing is that every single character, and we'll just limit it to our three main, each of these women is subjected to similar problems,
Exactly.
different variations of the same kinds of problems. And their position in the world, determines what options are available to them and how they have to navigate the situations, right? And that's where the stories don't feel repetitive, like we're looking at the same,
Exactly.
we're feeling the same thing, because we're getting people from different angles and different walks of life dealing with a similar problem set. And the way that those walks of life shape how they deal with those problems gives us so much insight into them. And I think, and this is something that I've been working with a few of my writers on, is one of the ways that she does this. So first of all, she starts by, again, what I talked about last week, putting them in rock and hard place territory. Every option sucks. Every option has huge risk to it. And now they have to evaluate and prioritize which one sucks the least, or which one, what am I prioritizing in this situation? And this gives us a clear sense of who they are and what they care about. But what we also get, this is taking advantage of the opportunity that we have because we are actually in someone's POV, which is giving us the opportunity to see how they think and assess. Again, we have strong voice in each of our main POVs, where and it's giving us a very clear sense of how they size up a problem and what their options are and what the potential solutions are. And that is one of the keys to helping us understand and sympathize with them, because we're watching them actively problem solve. So they're not just like navel gazing and they're just like, oh, here, right. So like Miriam, right, she's not just like, wow, everybody's so mean to me and my family and just on and on about that. She's saying, here's the problem. Here is what I'm up against. Here's my solution to it, right? And when we're actively watching her problem solve, and the way that she does that helps us understand her and sympathize, right? Because Miriam says, I run a great risk by collecting on my father's debts, but there's a bigger risk that isn't worth it, and that's my mom might not make it. And so she chooses, so a character who could come across as unsympathetic because she's kind of, for lack of a better word, she's kind of a hard ass about, collecting on the debts, which they've been owed for a very long time, right? Her family's been taken advantage of. A character who could come across as unsympathetic, we sympathize with deeply, right? She says, I will become this person because someone needs to protect my mom. And I will be the person to do that because I feel that my dad isn't stepping up to that plate, right? And so she is not unsympathetic, but we understand her deeply because we see the way she's sizing up the problem she's faced with and how she's choosing to solve that problem. And again, what she's prioritizing and risking and willing to do. Wanda initially, right, she could come across as hella selfish because she's like, no, I'm not telling my brothers about what I got going on. And no one's going to know because I've got a good thing and they might ruin it. Exactly. Instead, what we see is where she comes from and the risk she incurs because she doesn't actually have a lot of connection with her brothers. They are in this weird, barely surviving state. And so she doesn't know if she can trust them. And she's scared to break this thing that feels very fragile. And so instead of her coming across as unsympathetic and coming across as selfish, we see, oh, damn, I don't really blame her for being like, this could go wrong real fast for me if I don't play my cards right. And then as we watch her slowly warm, right, and go on that little bit of an arc as well, that mini arc in the first act of beginning to incorporate her brothers and beginning to find a way that maybe there's more for all of them and not just her, right? We watch that transformation, but man, do we get it when we are in her POV and we're like, I don't know if I'd risk it either, you know? And so we sympathize because we understand how they're sizing up the problem and how they're choosing to navigate that problem. And the same thing with Irina, who could come across as calculating, they all have these facets of themselves that, wielded incorrectly, would come across unsympathetic. But she takes advantage of the fact that we are in their point of view and uses that very clear mechanic so that we feel deeply for them. And those unsympathetic qualities are actually deeply understandable. And that is not that easy to do. Like, and so the way that she leverages the hardship that she exposes them to and the way they navigate it to help us understand their characters gives us so that, and she does it with every POV that she does, so that even people that we think that we wouldn't want to sympathize with, we're like, oh damn, like, I feel like, and you feel for them. And suddenly these characters become deeply human, which is why their experiences with one another are so moving. Because again, just like you said, when Wanda experiences real familial love, which she has not had, you just want to cry. And you do, and yeah, right. Like, or you outright cry because it's like, because we feel so deeply for that character. And that is like, that's the effect. That's what you want your characters to produce in a reader, is that like that level of emotional connection. And it's funny because it sounds sort of like technical and not cool, but how they solve problems is one of the ways you can actually do that, right? That's exactly your opportunity to, again, not tell us what they're like or tell us why they're like us, like that, but show us and let us see it in real time, because that's what gives it actual meaning to us, not what you tell us about them.
And all the way through the consequences, because one of the things that you mentioned in the plot is really lived out in this character aspect, which I think says so much, which is we see, especially for Wanda, I mean, we see for all of them in different ways, but the consequences of the choices they make, the choice was already hard.
Yeah.
They're picking the best of the bad decisions, but then you see everything from and let me back up one tiny pace. I always felt like one of the things that I loved about the Sookie Stackhouse series, I know y'all, I jumped a little bit, I'm gonna come back, I promise, that I love about the Sookie Stackhouse series is that she never held punches back from what Sookie experienced.
Yeah.
She was punched, she was hit, she was chained, like it was all
Sookie Stackhouse went through it.
Okay, I was like, dang, can a girl get a break? We get it. People are bad. We get it. But what happens here is that then you know how to perceive danger. You know how to assess the danger of her being in an environment that's outside of her norm. And that's what also happens here. And it happens beautifully. So when we see this, you don't miss the fact that there's not a lot of boom, bam, pow, because the progression of the stakes happens and we see it lived out through the consequences as well, not just through the choices. So when we see Wanda's dad going left, because he does, that man goes all the way. That gets progressively worse. Like we see the escalation of that. When we see Miriam's experience go up and down. She goes high, she goes low. Mom is sick, mom gets better. Dad is grandfather this. Like we see all of that. And all the while, I think Irina had one of the greatest ones that it felt like she was more, she reminded me a little bit of Glinda from Wicked. Let me tell you why. She just felt a little bit like she could have been a little bit just like on the airy side compared to the other two, feeling so grounded in realism. But then you realize, wait, this is not a fairy tale at all. Right.
Yeah.
And so having that and seeing them sort of live through that and seeing the consequences of that so that when they roll into another big choice, you're like, dang, again? Like, what are
Yeah.
they going to do now? And I think, again, which is why the first part had me like, come on, because once it rolls, it's
Yeah.
rolling. It's totally rolling. When you talk about that, it makes me think about because we are talking about Miriam's. I felt like it kind of feels a little bit on the squishy side, but I really love the relationship that she had with her parents, and I feel as if it was this subtle through line that goes all the way through to the end, that you see how she treats people because of the
Yeah.
way she was treated by people. And you
Mm-hmm.
also see what it's like for, we see this in people, right? They, people that are like fully loved, fully accepted, like they live and kind of move by the beat of their own drum because they have been fully accepted and given this space to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that wasn't 100%, but her parents, even in the beginning when they sort of barked at what she was doing, they didn't stop
Mm-hmm.
loving her. They
Yeah.
didn't stop accepting her. And we see something different for the other young ladies. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
was a very interesting take that we did get from the earlier, slower setup
Yeah.
because it played out itself beautifully on the other side. Because what that does, when you don't have nowhere else to go back to, that
Yeah.
shapes your decisions. It's
Yeah.
not like, oh, my parents are going to be there. No, I don't have nobody else. So I got to figure this out, or I
Yeah.
can't trust. And then when there was that one moment, again, without trying giving anything away, where Arena and her dad, baby dad came through like a
Yeah.
champ. I was like, okay, dad, I see you. But it was because when they began to step into those shoes and she was like, listen, I'm not about to fall back for you, because if I don't do this, we all gonna be in a world of hurt. And she's seeing something bigger than her just wanting to get out of this predicament. Even if it was a
Mm-hmm.
little bit like she liked it, she didn't. She didn't want to like it, she did like it. She
Yeah.
I think that was a good kind of romance not to, but whatever. So we see it through their consequences, and the consequences that we saw when it came to Miriam is the fact that she had this relationship with her parents, and I think it permeated through. I love when you make a decision like this and you see it through and you find ways to see it in unconventional ways. It wasn't
Yeah.
like she was saying, I'm being fair to these people because my parents loved me so much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. But that's what it is. You treat people fair because you've been loved on and you've been treated in a way, and you've in a lot of ways been sheltered, and even going all the way back to her father making decisions because it was just the right thing to do. People overextended it.
Yeah.
They took it the wrong way. But in the end, look, Mira said, I'm gonna get the last laugh of me and my daddy. So like she worked it out. But I think what that allows you to do, if you're a person that you struggle when it comes with character development and being able to truly see a full transformation, that's not just the transformation that's on the page. You saw her transformation internally and externally, and how
Mm-hmm.
both of those things sort of ebbed and flowed together. This
Yeah.
is a great story for that. And
Yeah.
it's not just her. You get the other ones. Like she give you the other ones, like, you know what, I'm just gonna give you these other ones on GP. Like you're gonna get the other ones for free. Okay. So what you do is you begin to see, like, how do you flip it? How do you take something that that already seemed bad and make it seem worse before it seems better? How do
Yeah.
you give something that seems like it's picture perfect, but behind closed doors, it's worse than what you think, but it's not as
Mm-hmm.
bad as this other situation? And not even to be in comparisons, but
Yeah.
having the parallel here serves the ultimate story of how one sense of a hardship being thrusted upon them by one character, if we will, or one circumstance, how it
Mm-hmm.
ping pongs through everyone's existence.
Yeah.
And this is how, when you have something that's a big story in this kind of really tight container that's written really well, plays out. And I think that is what characters and how she wrote this story does beautifully.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think that this is such a great example of again, really taking advantage of your character POVs and how you, because you're right? Like, and I talk to my clients about this, you know, when it comes to things like wounds as well, or lies we tell ourselves. If we were so like when we are acting out of a place that we're hurt, it's very rare until we've had like a few rounds of therapy or life or something that we're like, oh, I'm acting this way because my dad did X, Y, or Z, right? Like, or I'm acting this way because this is, especially again, early days, this is not usually how we are thinking because we don't actually know. We just know that something hurts and we don't want it to hurt again, or we don't want it to hurt anymore. And so that's why this sort of like demonstrating it in action, for example, right, the example of her family is so amazing, because at first it's a little bit like, he's a little too soft, right? And she goes and she sort of like makes up for that, but then her family, even in that first act, challenges her when she's like, I don't want to give her that much. Like, she's like, I will deal fairly with you. She's like, I don't give you that much, like, because she reflects on how she sort of like grumbled about how generous her mom was to Wanda and her brother, and the way that she was sort of like, okay, well, that seems a little excessive, you know. But the way that she kind of she takes this pendulum swing of she has to go really hard to protect her family, but then her family is there to kind of smooth out those edges. And that kind of plays out slowly over the story. And like you said, she doesn't sort of leave that thread. It's not like, in act one, like, it's like, cool, family, great. And then now we know that, so we're moving on, but actually pulling that all the way through the story, so that it matters and continues to matter and inform the story. But again, the point here being like, Miriam never thinks, I'll deal fairly with you because my parents are good to me, right? That's not how our minds work. And so those things come out because of how we behave, right? Again, it's our actions that tell us. So like for example, I could say, no, I'm really easygoing. I can say that. Dana is like, if you could see Dana's face, right? The way I behave will tell a very different story. My notes are always organized. I'm 5 minutes early to everything. I keep appointments obsessively. Like
listen, and Dana is here to test all of that because I'm a rub against all of that. I keep you on your toes.
It's true. It's given me a little like, I'm like, I'm learning to be flexible and a little spontaneous, a little. Come on. But that, like, the things that we say and the things that we do are where those things actually come to life. And again, the way that we think to ourselves about ourselves is very seldom as direct as narrating, you know, the simple cause and effect of life, because that's not how our minds work, and that's not how life works, right? It's many things that shape us. And so I can show you better than I can tell you, right? Exactly. And that's what I think that she does so well with this story, and why those things really come out so beautifully and so robustly, so that we experience them very deeply.
Yes, and you could, in theory, have one that could be just enough to pull you through the rest of the story. But because all three are strong, that's probably the most compelling aspect of it, because all three are compelling in different ways. So that when they intersect, it's like, wait, it's like, wait a minute, what just happened? And I'm like, I'm the person, I'm pausing and I'm like, wait, did I? I'm like, I'm never going to finish. I'm never going to finish that story. It's like the never ending story. I keep going back. And that's probably what made it so good too. Because sometimes you'll find like you just identify with one versus another. I think it's very interesting to see how she balanced them out. And there's different aspects of them, so that when they sort of converge and you get to the parts of the story where they are dependent and they are helpful, or they have there was this like a conversation between Miriam and Wanda. It was like the conversation that wasn't a conversation, of like when she started asking her about the payment, in which she look after her parents. That conversation, I don't want to give it all away. And it
Yeah.
was like her finally realizing, oh, wait, I didn't even know that. But she started putting together the dots without Wanda even fully having to say, and
Yeah.
just having the sort of, again, that dynamic that only comes from them not having a full conversation, but us catching the full meaning
Yeah.
because we've seen the rest of how everything has transpired. And again, it's just, she does it beautifully. The last thing that I have, which again, this is the part I mentioned last week that I thought was really great, is that yes, there's one magic, but I feel like we experience different facets of magic. And I
Yeah.
love this, especially if you're someone that you're not dealing with the enchantment magic or magic that is a supernatural magic. There that is here. But even if you're not, it's sort of like taking this element and looking at it through different lenses, because I felt like we see that Wanda is fascinated with numbers and even to the sense of rhythm and patterns when she's knitting, and to her it's magic because
Yeah.
it's her exposure to something that she didn't know before, and her taking it on like as her thing, and almost again that's tested in her future relationships of like, as in, this is what I contribute, and then later being told, no, you contribute so much more just because you are, right?
Yeah.
We see with Irena that she, I feel like her magic element represent through her knowledge and perception. Like she does a really great job in how she portrays her as a character of understanding the dynamics in power and the infrastructure. Like it could be that it's just because she's on the inside versus like Myra that would have been on the outside because she was a Jew. But we see that she's also on the outside too, being a woman and really just getting her to a place where she's married, she could get married off. And so what we see is that, you know, her powers comes from understanding what the rules are, hint hint, what we're talking about in storytelling, understanding what the rules are and working those things out in her favor.
Yeah.
And she does it so well, and making sure that it probably of all of them, I think she really has the opportunity to be totally selfish and becomes almost totally selfless, because it's not just about removing herself, and it's all in her negotiating and bargaining, right? Of how she, again, bargaining, coming back in.
Yeah.
And Miriam, she has the actual ability, and in the beginning, not realizing that it is an ability. She thinks it's just, I don't know what she thinks it is in the beginning. I think she just thinks it's that she realizes she has a skill set and she just applies it in a different space. She learns how to negotiate and sort of almost haggle, if you will.
Yeah.
And she sees that that's what happens. And then in part, it turns into something that isn't a true magical ability that she then has to learn even more. And with that said, this is a great story for learning how to start divulging magical abilities, right? As she's learning, we're learning. She's learning like, okay, wait, if I do it this way, and her meticulousness about going and looking in every corner and make sure she did everything just right, because she was in an environment where not just being intentional, but being very specific played a part, and she works that. So the point is, those three things are things that could have been like just characterized as thematic. It can be those three things of we are looking at this sense of magic from those three different perspectives. It could even be just allowing that element to have more depth based on each of their circumstances. But that means that in all ways, it's not just can she turn silver into gold. It's like, what does magic mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean in this space for this particular character? How is it exercised? What are the rules in which it resides? And I'm saying all of this, especially for the people who don't work in a magical arena, who thinks that this, I'm not talking to you. No, this is actually how your world operates. How does relationships operate? How does this office environment operate? Because a lot of times what happens, you have this free fall and there is no tension, but there's got to be rules. even if you never state them. Because once you know what those rules are, that's when you can bump up against them, cross over, have consequences, don't want to go cross it, so they're being challenged. And you can begin to use that and how you, in this discussion, shape character and how we show their transformation. And this is how you bring it to the page.
Yeah, well, and it's actually interesting because if you remember last week, I talked about the expert workshop series I did for Pro Writing Aid, where it's sort of like mapping out where the conflict is at in your story and finding what those sources actually are. And the approach of the workshop was specifically if you're struggling to find it, right? If you're sort of like, I can't lock down my character's goals or motivations, or I can't quite find the conflict, it's sort of like, it's probably there. You just need to know where to look. And it's this aspect of the people's position in the world changes their experience of that world. Exactly. And it's going to change their perspective on how you solve problems, on what the good outcomes are, what the right outcomes are, how the world perceives the decisions that they make, and the way that interplay generates conflict, right? And the way that tension comes. So you're talking about, like if you think about an office dynamic, every office has different dynamics, right? Like, and when you think about the specific individuals who make up that office and the way that it works, and what are the unspoken rules, right? What do we definitely not do? And who knows those? And who is coming in and is like, I didn't know that was a thing we can't do. Like, I remember working in an office and there was, one of the ladies who worked in the office, she had like kind of like school teacher energy. So she was always like kind of like correcting people, and like if we were talking at the front desk, we were having a conversation while we were waiting for copies, she would come out and she'd be like, excuse me, do you have something you need to be doing? Like nothing to do with her. And so you learned when you did like how to navigate around this person, because you ran into it and you were like, you're not my mom. Like, what are you doing?
I'm grown.
But when you are an intern and you're at the bottom of the totem pole, you don't say that. You find a way around it. You find a workaround so that you can have a normal conversation with another human and not get, sort of like teacher, finger shook at. But that informed a very specific type of dynamic, and you only learned it one way. And it was, unless you're really, really watching, you only learn it the hard way. And so the point here being that like these are the dynamics at work in the real world, right? The way that we perceive someone's charisma, how people who are maybe actually good people rub us the wrong way because we are seeing them from a specific perspective or in a specific instance. These are those like the minutia of life and the world and how it works. And the cool thing about fantasy is like, because it's sort of like the way we're able to explore, a social, political, cultural phenomena from an abstraction. Fantasy, sometimes you can see it a little more easily because you're like, oh yeah, I made this world and people are very specifically like stacked in these different ways and there's all these different dynamics. But to recognize that this happens in the real world too. Right. And that like, and to kind of be able to like see past like, oh yeah, like there's all of these mechanisms at work that are almost invisible until they're not. So you run into them and you're like, oh, there's a wall there. And so I think that's so helpful, right? To like, if you think I'm not talking to you, it's like, this matters for you, but and what it looks like is maybe just a little bit different because it's again in a workplace or in a family or in a whatever, right? And I think Naomi Novik does such a great job because she brings that into all facets, right? The magic of the Hebrew song or the Hebrew prayer for Wanda, who's seeing it as an outsider, and the magic of the love of a mother, and these other elements, so that it's magic layered all the way through.
The last part it makes me think about is like, as you're exploring and you're thinking about character, you sort of start thinking about all the things that sort of touch and concern them. Not just that seems the obvious to the story, but also those things that sort of makes them believe, or who they believe makes them who they are. And then what starts happening is it starts bumping into the others. Yeah. Right. And I think she used those bumps so well. And the fact that some of those bumps become laced with magic, I was like,
yes.
You say what, Rachel? She's like, ooh, look. It is. It just, this is where you just gotta stop and just give the person like their props 10 toes down, because they can make it look easy. This is not easy. So that's why when we have these discussions, it's hard to talk about some things because you're like, this is not easy. So it's easy for me to look at and point at, but it's really not. But what it does is it helps you to just have those moments of then saying, as a writer, what do I need to know about my characters? Why this character? Why now? What is it about this situation that is going to challenge them to become the version of themselves that they ultimately truly want to be in? And where we see the three of them when they start, they are accepting because they have no choice. And then life tells them you do have a choice, but you're going to have to pay for it. And then goes back to the bargaining. What are you willing to pay for it?
Yeah.
What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to do? And it's sort of wrapped in this thing of like of winter and cold and love and porridge and family, like all of this stuff that you're just realizing that you're being enveloped. And I think that is what becomes such a really a nice element of fantasy that I just always got to just like take off my head. I'm like, okay, this is the part I love about it. Like I always love that you could take these things that we normally have such a hard time expressing, because it does bump into real people's situations, and people dictate like what's politically correct to say or not say. And now because we put this fantastical lens on it, you can explore these things and how it affects people groups and genders and money and politics and things like that in a way that is not off-putting, because we think you're not talking about me, you're talking about the ska, or you're talking about the, I think when we talk about Fourth Wing or whatever the stories that you're talking about. And so it makes for a great story. Before we close out this discussion, was there anything else concerning characters that you wanted us to be sure that we sort of talked about before we close out our discussion?
Yes, ma'am. Let me just make a quick, we've already kind of like danced around it, but I want to just like tap on it super quick, because I think that if you are dealing with a multi-POV story, this is a good one to look at in terms of still having a very clear protagonist. Like we have two very clear supporting, like secondary protagonists, sort of. But Miriam is still very clearly like our protagonist. We're never confused about who this story is about at the end of the day. I think that's really important, especially because, we're going to get all kind of POVs. And so to not feel like, wait, I'm sorry, whose story is this? Because we see that they're all weaved together, but it's like Miriam is sort of like our through line, and paying attention to that in the story. So the biggest thing that's going to kind of, there's a couple of major things that are going to kind of help you to identify that for your story, as well as like what we see in this story, which is, first of all, it's Miriam's choices that bring the other two, that get the other two wrapped up in the story in the first place, right? Hiring Wanda and getting that and selling that ring. So the way that Miriam is choosing to solve the problems as they continue to confront her, they sort of get the other two wrapped into the story. So we still see that she's the one kind of like driving what's happening, while pulling the other two and their stories kind of into her story alongside her. And also the one who ultimately has to face down and solve the problem. She is the one who ultimately is responsible for resolving. So it's her actions that are driving more of the story than anything else. And Wanda and Irina have significant decisions that they make, but at the end of the day, Miriam is the one who's driving that, and whose decisions are again having that biggest impact. And so I want to call that out for anybody who is, again, interested in exploring a multi-POV story, and also just worth noting that, we talk so much about all three of them having very deep characters and very deep arcs, and yet we still are very clear on who our protagonist is, which I think is important, because it can make a story feel muddy if we're like, I don't actually know who I'm supposed to be looking at, but we always kind of understand where that through line is. And I think she does that really well in this story.
Awesome. I agree. I think the biggest point that you look at is normally like, what are those moments that are turning the story or driving it, and who is at the center of it. And you do see several of them where they sort of kind of come together, but it's sort of what she decides to do or not, and where she is in her transformation that determines where the story sits. And so it's very clear. And she's such a good protagonist too.
She really is. Oh, I love her.
Oh my gosh. When she started doing the questions part, I was just like, oh, that's so good. It was such a good take. I've asked you once, but is there anything else that we need to cover before we close this out?
Because no, again, we know we can't do everything.
Oh, okay. Because we can't do everything. This is such a good story. And to be able to do this without spoilers, y'all need to go ahead and give us our props, because this is a hard one to talk about without spoilers. So with that said, if you are just joining us, I hope that you go back and look at our previous episodes. This is our one on characters, and next week we're going to come back with our editor's takes. I think that one is going to be so juicy, because this has so many different elements that it's sort of hard to put in the structure that we've created. So we'll be able to talk about those things. If you haven't done so already, you should already have this on your TBR. Go ahead, do yourself a favor, add it to your TBR. And we don't get anything from it. However, except for being the one to introduce you to a really great story. Thanks to Rachel. So with that said, if you want to find out more information about us, you can visit us online at storydeepdive.com. You can listen to our podcast, or you can even watch it by going to YouTube and looking for us there. But if you go to our website, we have the links there for you to find us. Don't forget to leave us a comment or a question, especially because we have sporadic bonus episodes throughout the year that we will take your questions or consider some of the topics that you have, and especially consider some of your reading recommendations if you have some for us to consider for future reads. We will be back next week with our editor's takes, continuing with Spinning Silver. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you really, really soon. Take care and happy writing. Goodbye.